Now, no matter what size of vegetable space you have to grow in, I'm sure one of your main aims will be to try and maximise that space and therefore grow as many vegetables as you possibly can. Now, all of our growing spaces will be different. Some of us will have very large growing spaces, some of us will have more modest growing spaces, some of us may even have balconies or really tiny spaces to grow vegetables. And if we can use our vegetable spaces in an efficient way, then we're going to be as productive as we possibly can. Now, something we often have to deal with in our vegetable growing spaces is shade. And as you can see, I'm currently in an area of my garden where I've got partial sunshine and partial shade, and that changes through the day as the sun moves around, and therefore there's an awful lot of areas of my garden that get shade throughout the day, but that doesn't mean to say that those areas can't be productive. As you can see in front of me, in a very shady area here, I've got vegetables growing really well. And in this video, I'm going to share with you 7 different types of vegetables that could be highly productive growing in shady areas, and therefore possibly show you areas in your vegetable space which you might not have considered previously to grow vegetables because you may have thought that you couldn't grow in those shady areas. Now, it's worth mentioning that the vast majority of vegetables love light, in fact need light to grow. Vegetables will need light through the photosynthesis process in order to help feed the plants, to help them develop and grow. And typically 8 to 10 hours of light per day will allow vegetables to really thrive. However, as you're going to see, not all vegetables need that amount of light every single day in order to be able to grow. As you can see behind me, I'm in quite a shaded area of my garden, but there's lots of really healthy growth of vegetables in this area. And as the sun moves around from east to west in this direction during the day, this area will typically get 3 to 4 good hours of light, and the rest of the time it will be partial shade or complete shade. And as you can also see, this area has a hedge at the back, and that's going to allow a certain amount of shade into this area. Now, because of the restraints in this area and the limited amount of light at certain times of the day, not every single type of vegetable will be able to grow here. There are certain vegetables, particularly vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, sweet corns, and many other sun-loving vegetables that would not grow very well in this area here. So those type of vegetables in my garden I have in containers in sunny parts of the garden. Also, you might find in shady parts of your garden that vegetables may grow a little slower in comparable to vegetables in full sunlight. But ultimately, the vegetables growing in this area are growing perfectly okay, and helps me to make use of an area that last year was completely overgrown. And because my vegetable growing area across my garden is quite small, I'm really grateful of the extra space. Now, the first vegetable that I'm going to suggest that grows really well in the shade is beets or beetroot. As you can see behind me, a completely shaded area here, but some really lovely healthy growth of beetroots. I've 2 varieties of beets just behind me here. The first one is one of my favourites, which is Boltardy, which never fails, always produces really good beets. And the other one that's in here is a variety called Bonetta. I've also got another variety which I haven't planted yet, which is a variety called Detroit 2. So there's plenty of varieties of beetroot to choose from, and as you can see, they grow perfectly well in the shade. Now, some of the vegetables I'm going to feature in this video, I'm going to recommend that you start them off in cell trays rather than starting them off directly in the shade. But beetroot's different. I always recommend that you sow beetroot seeds directly into their final positions. And that's because I tend to find the beetroot don't transplant very well. They may be a little bit slower to germinate because they're in the shade, but if you're patient with them, they'll be absolutely fine. Now, when sowing beetroot seeds, make sure the compost or the soil is prepared, it's nice and well drained and fertile. You'll plant the beetroots at around about 1.5 centimetres depth and then cover them with a light covering of compost and water them. If you are going to do rows, you want those about 12 inches apart. So as you can see, beets or beetroot is a fantastic vegetable that you can grow in partial shade. Now, I've just moved around to a part of my garden that's currently in full sunshine, but as the sun moves around during the day, in a few hours time this will be in partial shade. Behind me here you can see that I've got some cauliflowers, and that's another vegetable that doesn't mind some partial shade. Now, cauliflowers do like full sunshine, but they can take some partial shade and they might grow a little bit slower. Nevertheless, they still produce some really good cauliflowers during the growing season. Now, the cauliflowers I have here behind me are a variety called All the Year Round, and I started these off as seeds in cell trays around about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and then only recently transplanted them out to where they are now. Notice if you're growing cauliflowers, even in shady areas, you're still going to need to protect them from insects and birds, because as a brassica they will get attacked and they won't last very long if you don't provide some form of protection for them. This is debris netting or scaffold netting, and it's very, very fine and won't allow many insects inside. But I would always recommend, if you are going to start any brassicas, including cauliflowers, start them off in cell trays, and when they're large enough, transplant them out. So cauliflowers are another vegetable that you can grow in partially shaded areas. Now, in my opinion, a really underrated vegetable that can be grown in partial shade is kale. I absolutely love kale and it is so easy to grow. As a brassica, it doesn't seem to be attacked in the way that other brassicas are. And although it's not completely pest free, it's a lot more resilient. And as you can see, it produces really good, strong plants really quickly that can be used as a cut and come again crop, which means you'll cut off some leaves at a time and then it will keep growing, and you keep doing that and get a regular supply of kale. I've got about half a dozen plants in here which I planted as seeds round about 12 weeks ago and transplanted them into these positions round about a month ago. And as you can see through the netting, the growth on them is absolutely fabulous. This is a variety called dwarf green curled. I always question why it's got dwarf on the front of it, because this will grow to the top of the netting, so it's not small at all. Now, just like cauliflowers, kale does like full sunshine and it will thrive in those conditions, but it will also take partial shade. If you've never grown kale before, give it a try. It's almost like a concentrated cabbage type of taste, but it's got lots of really good nutrients in it and it's very flavourful. Now, because I know that the kale is going to be in a partially shaded area, I will also start these in cell trays. If you haven't tried kale or this variety dwarf green curled, definitely give that a try, and that's something that will grow really well in a partially shaded area. Now, if you've got really limited space and a very small shaded area and you had to choose one vegetable to grow in that shaded area, my recommendation would be that crop should be lettuce. From the vegetables I grow, I find that lettuce is the one that thrives the most in shady areas and doesn't really need an awful lot of light in order to get some fantastic lettuce. Now, at the time of filming this video, we're right at the end of June, and I've been harvesting lettuce now for the last 3 months in this area here. And as you can see at the moment, this is currently in full shade. In fact, actually, this bed here is probably the one that gets the most shade out of all the beds in the whole of my vegetable plot. But nevertheless, the lettuce that I'm producing are absolutely fabulous. This variety here is a variety called Lola Rossa, and the green ones that you can see around, they're a variety called Little Gem. But there's so many varieties of lettuce for you to choose from, you can really pick whatever your favourites are. These two varieties plus Lakeland and Webb's lettuce are probably my favourite, and I'll continue to grow this lettuce all the way through the growing season. Even when we get to the latter part of summer into autumn, I'll be planting lamb's lettuce, which is much more tolerant to colder temperatures. So this bed here is productive for the vast majority of the year. We'll start lettuce in cell trays indoors and then transplant them out into their final positions once they're large enough. Now, often when you get a packet of lettuce seeds, there's usually 2,500 seeds in there, so there's no reason why you couldn't try and plant them directly into the bed, because if you lose a few, it's not going to make a difference. I just find when they're very tiny and when they're emerging, if you've got certain types of pests like slugs or flea beetles or other type of wildlife, they tend to go for the lettuce first, so I'll always start mine in cell trays, wait for them to get to a certain size and then transplant them out. Lettuce is a really fabulous vegetable grow in partially shaded areas. Now, my next recommendation is linked very close to lettuce and is another type of salad leaf, and that is Arugula. In the UK we call it rocket, and it's a really lovely peppery flavoured type of salad leaf. Now, I can't really grow enough of this because as soon as it's ready we harvest it and use it. I really need to increase the area of rocket I grow because we use quite a lot of it. Now, I have got some in this bed here just behind the lettuce, but it's still a few weeks away from being able to use. Now, I've been growing and harvesting rocket since the early part of April. As you can see, I've reached a point now where we're using it faster than it's growing, so I need to plant some more of this. In fact, I did sow some more seeds about a week ago, and as soon as they're large enough I'll transplant them into the spaces in here. But definitely keep sowing rocket, and if you have got partially shaded areas, there's no reason why it can't grow there. Now, the variety I'm currently growing is just called rocket mixed. It's just a standard variety of rocket or Arugula that I always find productive. Now, in all of my videos, I always try and ensure that whatever I'm explaining, I actually show you what I'm doing, just so that you can see what I'm actually doing. I am trying, and if it works, or sometimes if it doesn't. For my last two recommendations of vegetables that you can grow in the shade, I haven't currently got them in those raised beds yet, because they're not large enough to transplant. As you can see just here, I do have a seed tray, which has got some of the seeds of my next recommendation in, but clearly they're not large enough to transplant yet. But my next recommendation for a vegetable that will grow in partial shade is Swiss chard. This is a variety called white silver 2, and it's always a great vegetable to grow because it's really versatile. Some people might classify these as a winter veg because they don't mind cooler temperatures either, and that's why this is another vegetable to grow in an area that doesn't get full sunlight. So these seeds were planted about 2 weeks ago, so I'll prick them out, transplant them into individual cell trays when they're large enough, and probably in round about 4 weeks time I'll transplant them out into the raised beds, into those partially shaded areas. But Swiss chard is another great vegetable to grow if you've not grown that before. And my next recommendation, which appears on a lot of my vegetable growing videos, is radish. And radish is always a recommendation because it's such a quick and versatile vegetable to grow. You can plant these within about 7 to 8 weeks, you can harvest them. And these will grow perfectly well in partially shaded areas. They might grow a little bit slower than if they was in full sunshine, but radish are a great vegetable to grow all year round. This is a variety called Sparkler 3. And if you do watch my channel on a regular basis, you'll know that I also recommend a variety called French Breakfast. There are so many varieties of radish available, it really is down to your own personal choice. These are great as well if you have a balcony and you've only got containers. Radish are a perfect veg to grow in containers. So that's my 7 recommendations for vegetables that can be productive in partially shaded areas in your vegetable garden. In fact, there are many other vegetables that will grow in shady areas that I've not covered in this video. In fact, right in front of me here, I've got French beans, a variety called Ferrari. I've got carrots, a variety called Autumn King 2. I've got celery, Octavius F1, and there are many others as well. But in my opinion, the 7 I've selected for me are the most productive. And I hope it's given you 1 or 2 ideas and also give you confidence to maybe look around your vegetable growing space and try to find areas that you might not have used before to grow vegetables. But thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did like it, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe to the channel for future videos on how to sow and grow fruit, vegetables and flowers, and 1 or 2 recipe ideas, don't forget to press the subscribe button. I'll see you all on the next video.